You ever have one of those moments where life just throws something unexpected at you? Like, you're going about your day, minding your own business, and suddenly, boom, something happens that completely shifts your perspective. That's exactly what happened to Chris. He wasn't looking for anything special that day, just another regular afternoon stepping out of his car. But right there, on the side of the road, was this tiny ball of fur. At first, he thought it was just a pile of leaves or something, but when he looked closer, he saw it move. It was a baby squirrel, and it wasn't doing well. Now, here's a question for you. What would you do in that situation? Would you keep walking, assuming nature would take care of itself? Or would you stop, knowing that this little thing probably wouldn't make it through the night on its own? Chris didn't even think twice. He looked around, trying to see if the mother was nearby. Maybe she was just out gathering food and would be back any second. But the more he searched, the more obvious it became. This little guy was completely alone. And that realization hit him hard. Chris knew he couldn't just leave the squirrel there. But he also had no idea what to do. I mean, how do you take care of a baby squirrel? He wasn't some wildlife expert. He didn't have experience rescuing animals. He was just a regular guy who now had this tiny, helpless creature looking up at him. And that's when the question started running through his mind. What do baby squirrels even eat? How do you keep one warm? Am I even doing the right thing? Chris wasn't sure, but he knew he had to try. He carefully scooped up the squirrel, cradling it in his hands, and drove home. That night, instead of watching TV or scrolling through his phone, he was deep in research mode. He learned that baby squirrels need a special formula. They can't regulate their body temperature, and they need constant care, just like a newborn baby. And let me tell you, this was not easy. For the first few nights, Chris barely got any sleep. Every few hours, he had to wake up to feed the squirrel, making sure it got the right nutrients. He wrapped it up in soft blankets, kept it warm, and whispered to it, hoping it felt safe. But there were moments of doubt. What if I'm just delaying the inevitable? What if he doesn't survive? Am I getting too attached? But then, something incredible happened. After a few weeks of non-stop care, the little squirrel opened his eyes for the first time. And Chris swears, at that moment, it was like he was looking at a tiny, grateful soul. He decided to give him a name, Acorn. Acorn wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. He started exploring, climbing up Chris's arms, nuzzling into his shirt pocket, and following him around like a little shadow. And here's the thing, Chris had never really been an animal person. He liked animals, sure, but he never thought he'd have a bond like this. Have you ever had a pet that felt more like family than just an animal? That's exactly what was happening. Acorn became part of the household. He'd sit at the dinner table, well, more like sneak snacks off plates. He'd chase the kids around, curling up in their laps when he got tired. And every morning when Chris was getting ready for work, Acorn would tug at his sleeve, as if saying, "Don't go." But deep down, Chris knew something. This wasn't supposed to be permanent. See, when Chris first found Acorn, his plan was simple. Help him heal, then release him back into the wild. That's where he belonged. That's where he'd be happiest. But now, Acorn had never known the wild. He had never climbed a real tree or foraged for food. He only knew warm hands, cozy blankets, and the safety of Chris's home. And that scared Chris. Did I do the right thing raising him? Would he survive if I let him go? What if he doesn't want to leave? It was one of the hardest choices he ever had to make. But he knew Acorn deserved a real squirrel's life. So Chris started taking him outside, little by little. At first, Acorn was nervous, sticking close to Chris's feet. But over time, something changed. His instincts kicked in. He started climbing, exploring, and running through the grass. Then, one day, something happened that broke Chris's heart. Acorn didn't want to come back inside. Chris watched as Acorn scampered up a tree, disappearing into the branches. He waited. Minutes turned into hours. Acorn didn't return. Chris knew this was supposed to happen. He had prepared for it. But that didn't make it any easier. It felt like watching a child move out for the first time, proud, but also painfully aware that things would never be the same. The next morning, Chris stepped outside, half hoping to see Acorn waiting for him on the porch, but the yard was empty. And then, just as he was about to head inside, he heard a familiar rustling in the trees. He looked up, and there he was, Acorn. He had built a nest in a tree right in front of the house. He was home, but on his own terms. Chris never expected any of this. He didn't expect to save a squirrel. He didn't expect to get so attached. And he definitely didn't expect a tiny creature to change his entire perspective on life. But Acorn did. This whole experience taught him something important. Sometimes, helping someone doesn't mean keeping them close. It means giving them the chance to be free. And honestly, how often do we struggle with that? Whether it's kids growing up, friendships changing, or loved ones moving on, letting go is never easy. But sometimes it's exactly what needs to happen. So here's my question to you. What's your Acorn? Maybe it's an animal. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a moment in life where you have to make a tough choice. Whatever it is, just remember, love isn't about holding on too tight. It's about knowing when to let go. And if this story hit home for you, do me a favor, share it. You never know who might need to hear it. And hey, if you want more stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.